and welcome back to the Book and Life podcast. Today we're going to have a brand new book guest on. Whether they're an author, an editor, a producer, you'll never quite know, so you're in for one hell of a ride. But today I just have to do the adverts and then I'll get us straight into that most important conversation. And as we do every week, I'm going to read The Shadow, which is part of the Time Guardian series, and this is book 4 from Marianne Curley. The battle is over, the war is won. The prophecy complete, but life can't just pick up where it left off for Ethan, struggling to cope with tragic loss. At odds with friends in the guard, he finds himself adrift, jumping in shadows and sensing someone who can't possibly be there. Blaming herself for the goddess Athena's death, Giselle swears revenge, to vilify the Immortals' plan for world domination. But Giselle hadn't planned on love, and that leaves her with an unbearable choice. Should she follow her heart, or the strings of a goddess short on praise but high on expectation, who continues to pull her from the grave? As the Guard and the Order battle through the past and into an impossible future, darkness lurks round every corner. The fight for the world's survival rests with just one. Is it friend or foe who stands in the shadow? And just a reminder that The Price of Freedom by Rosemary Rowan, is being donated to the Ukraine refugee crisis. And here's the blurb for her book. It's one of her Roman British crime series, which was written under her maiden name. All editions can be found online where all books are sold, even her agents donating her commission. Sorry, I don't have the blurb for that, but that's what she's doing. And now, without further ado, let's get you to the guests.
Welcome back to the Book and Life podcast, guys. I was blown away when I got this person to agree to come on my show. I was super ecstatic. He is phenomenal in all the industries that he works in. He is definitely changing our conversations and helping guide us into a much better, I would say, future for all. But without further ado, and I do not want to oversell him to you all, I would like to take the absolute greatest honor in welcoming Anthony Mango to the podcast.
You can sell me as high as you want. Thank you for all the kind words. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I mean, I've had other, like, I had a couple of comic book writers on, and I did that, and then there was this just dead silence because they'd actually been stunned into silence. And I was like, ooh, oops. But let's hear about you. Tell the world what makes Anthony Anthony.
When you go through a list of ingredients and then you throw it all away and then you try to restart a recipe, that's what makes me me. I don't know. I mean, I'm the type of person that a lot of people would describe as, he's a character in a lot of ways, but then I don't feel like I am. I feel like I'm the most rational, logical human being that exists. So,
and in our neck of the woods and with what we do, you have to be, because there's so many crazy people in our industry that I don't know.
I think you have to be crazy.
Yeah, like, how are we so sane when everybody else is nuts? Is like the question I ask myself every day.
And they're the problem.
Yeah, exactly. Like I go in a game with people, and I think, oh, these people are kind of sane. And then I go to work and then I'm like, no, these people are the ones that are insane. How does that work? Like, am I missing something? So yeah, I
live in New York, so I'm constantly coming across people that make me question my own sanity just by walking around the streets.
I don't blame you. I live in Glasgow, and there's sometimes when I'm standing on the street corner, just like head in my hands, thinking, I'm not seeing what I'm seeing. Like, no, no. No. And of course, Glasgow loves to just throw you a curveball every 5 seconds, and you're just like, why did I come out the house today? Did they let
That's
the
a question I
ceiling
ask
down again?
myself every time I step out.
Yeah, I just think it's safer in the house, away from all the crazy. So tell us about your work. What is the thing that you're most proud of right now?
Oh, so I am all over the place when it comes to the work stuff. I mean, if you focus on the pro wrestling side of things, if you focus on the Fanboys Anonymous side of things, or the creative writing side of things, there are things to be proud of and things to constantly be frustrated about because, of course, you never are accomplishing what you really want to accomplish in this
Of
space.
course.
But
Yep.
when it comes to, I guess, like the thing that I put above everything else, it'd probably be what I call the Blueprint Project.
Yeah.
Which is a whole subdivision that in and of itself is, I mean, if you click on my Evernote, you'd see so many different lists of notes for different things. But the long and short of that is basically a pitch of what if you took the entire history of a character, whether it was all the movies, all the TV shows, all the comics, all the video games, all the audio dramas, anything that exists, fan fiction, real canon of stories.
Yeah.
And you tried to boil it down to the most condensed gold standard version that you can. And that I have notes and, fully written out things and everything for, I mean, you name it when it comes to things that I'm a fan of. My Batman one is probably the one that I put above everything else because Batman's my favorite character that's ever existed in any kind of medium.
You make me
But
think of a pro wrestling friend of mine when you say that.
for Batman, you mean?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I always think of Stevie Richards because I didn't really have any of understanding of Batman till I met him, and then I was like, it was a very quick study session on what makes Batman Batman and why Batman is cool and how did I not know this? So yeah,
I
it's
need to reach out to him and geek out over Batman because if anybody clicks on, I have 5 of those videos up on YouTube on my Fanboys Anonymous channel that the best way to explain it is basically that one in of itself, and they're all different. I mean, the Star Wars one is a full rewrite of fixing things like, Luke and Leia shouldn't have kissed. So, let's not take that in there.
Yep.
And, if you pitch something like Owen Lars should have been one of the, instead of Captain Panaka, it should have been Owen Lars throughout the prequels, like little like retooling of elements and then, fixing other things that worked, using the things that are better. The Batman one, that's 100 stories. And that in and of itself is, it's an undertaking, but I took the first 5 and I put videos up pitching about that on YouTube where you can see progressively the change of how I got better at editing from the first video throughout the 5 videos and, used some AI stuff to make some artwork because I can't draw at all. My wife has all that talent. I don't have the slightest bit of artistic talent on that end.
I'll join you on that one. Yep.
So that's something that even if you click on those videos, they get longer as they go on, they get more complicated, and they dive into every little element of what makes Batman Batman and the Bruce Wayne story from top to bottom. So I'm going to have to try to reach out to Steve Richards and be like, hey, you want to geek out over Batman? And start arguing whether Rex Calabrese should be more focused on than Falcone and all. Like,
definitely, I think he would love that. And one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show is you like to build your characters 3D when you're doing your creative stuff, and I think that's incredible. And it also reminds me of a gentleman that I have a great, deep love for as a friend. And you very much remind me of the way that you tackle your work, similar to how Raven used to tackle his characters and how he used to kind of bring a world into the storylines he told, whether it was in TNA or whether it was in ECW. And Yeah, so there was a little bit of tying of pro wrestling into it, I think, because pro
Yeah.
wrestling shaped how I write, particularly, like, you know, from my history, I've worked with Joey Legend. I have I've touched down on a lot of different big names to say, hey, how can I make this world better? What am I missing? And none of them believe in wrestling and romance coming together. So that was like my biggest obstacle, the amount of weird, strange looks I got with that. Um,
Which
but
is strange because that is the case. It's
it
pro
is,
wrestling is a
yeah,
fascinating blend of every single element you could ask for in storytelling.
exactly. And I think it almost sort of blows wrestlers' minds that there would be a book that would come out with romance at the heart of it and wrestling as the backdrop. Like they don't have relationships and romances that are just as chaotic as their lives in the ring. Because let's be fair, anybody that's a pro wrestling fan, we all know the drama that goes on behind the
Hmm.
curtain. And it's okay, maybe it's not quite as bad as, gets reported, but it's like high school back there.
Yeah.
Everybody's got crushes on everybody else, and everything's just going like a whole high school kind of scenario.
Yeah,
And
the gossip train, the whole he said she said about things. It's pro
yeah,
wrestling is, I mean, it's more high school than high school in a lot of ways.
yeah, and I think the reason that pro wrestling has lasted as long as it has, and this is me being genuine, is I think that there's a part of all of us that kind of wants a little bit of high school back because high school was fun. When
Yeah.
you think about it, like we were excited to go to school, not to learn, but to see what the latest drama was in school.
Hmm.
Who's kissed who? Who's sleeping with who? Who's suddenly dating who? Like, no matter as if when you boil it down to chemistry and you boil it down to, I would say, primal instincts, people cannot cannot resist gossip. They can't
No,
resist
absolutely
drama.
not.
That's what
Especially
makes,
my wife.
well, yeah, exactly. And entertainment is essentially just drama. And wrestling was almost like an acceptable male version of drama, of like a storytelling daily soap opera drama telling session. And I think that's what people missed. Whereas like after sitting and I've sat and I've listened to Vince Russo for months on end. I've sat and I've listened to I don't think I'm ever going to get this once back. I love him to death, but poof. And
Bro.
and I listened to Eric Bischoff, and when I boiled it all down and I really thought about it, I was like, they're reliving high school. This is their like school reunion, but they get to actually act out something that they would never normally get to act out. Because let's
It's a
let's be
good
honest.
analogy.
Yeah, let's be honest. How many wrestlers do you think were actually popular in high school? I don't think
So
there was many at all.
this is one of those times where it's going to sound like I'm tooting my own horn, but trust me, I'm not. So my experience in high school, I was very much the type of person that I look back on high school fondly. And, when you have
Yep.
discussions with certain people that are like, I wouldn't go back there if you paid me $1 million. And I'm like, oh, that was like one of my peaks was in high school.
It was
I
mine too.
was
Yep.
I was that type of person that I was told eventually by some people that I didn't realize how popular that I was. And I was like, well, I didn't think that I was, but
Mhm.
when you get to where you're like, oh, I was nominated for prom king or whatever like that. It's like in my
Yeah.
mind, I'm like, oh, I didn't win it, but and I was involved in the plays in school. Like, I
Yeah.
broke out of my shell enough to be able to do that. So I always brought a sense of like, I was the type of person that would try to spice things up. I would, hey, let's all wear suits and speak super Italian today. And no matter what question we're answering. And like, of course I got in trouble a couple of times here and there, but when you're bored and you're trying to bring that dramatic element to something in a fun way, or, you're trying to ham it up on stage or something, that translates into wrestling so much because you get that urge to be in front of people. And I've never been, a pro wrestler. I certainly would never actually be able to pull that off athletically, but
No, neither would I.
I can't go an episode of Raw or SmackDown or NXT or anything and not feel this urge of, I wish I was a manager and I could just go out
Yep.
there, and if I could get booed by thousands of people, oh my God, that would be one of the biggest gems in my entire life, which is an awful thing to say.
I think for me, like, I grew up kind of similar to you. I didn't know I was popular. I was known in, like, I was infinite of infamy was, I think, the way that they put it to me. When I kind of got, when everybody grew up and they stopped being, the high school idiots that we were. And they were like, I was one of the people that no matter what year you were in school, they knew who I was.
Totally.
Because I floated around. I was the chick that danced in the halls between classes because she was bored out of her goddamn mind. I was the girl that would come up with these unique stories and try and entertain my classmates because I didn't want 50% of my class getting kicked out every class. And these were just elements. But what I was doing outside of school that I suppose gave me this reputation of she doesn't care and she's the coolest person ever was I had started to dance. I was acting on stage, I was dancing, I was creating a dance program for kids that were at risk. Because I realized first year of school, like first year of high school, I'm sitting there and I'm going, 90% of the girls in my year drink to excess. We've had 2 failed teen pregnancies. Shit, we need to do something about this. Like, somebody needs to do something about this, whether, And then I realized none of the adults cared. And it was almost like a aha moment. Like, I was like, well, how do I change this? Like, how do I stop my classmates from going down a road that they're not going to come back from? And at 13 years old, I was like, okay, I'm going to start dance class. I'm going to start hip hop classes. I'm going to start doing Apache, which is basically the dance equivalent to wrestling, by the way, guys. And I brought people in, and I brought that whole world together. And I I didn't think that made me popular. To me, it was like I was doing it because I cared about the people that were in my school. But it wasn't.
And you were passionate about what you were doing too. Yeah. So that's, when you are passionate about something, then it just, you naturally succeed.
Yeah. And that was the thing. Like, everybody said, oh my God, it would be hilarious to have you and CM Punk in a ring. And they give you a mic and they say, hey, just say whatever you want because you could probably outstaff and outthink that guy in about 2 seconds flat just because of the wit and the fact that you know how to go for the jugular. You know how to shut somebody whose ego is slightly bigger than it should be down. And I went, but that wouldn't be the fun with him. That wouldn't be what the fun of taking a mic and taking the stage away from somebody like that would be. And actually, I taught that in school. And I think a lot of I had people come by to me 15 years later and say, hey, the only reason I got a job doing X, Y, and Z was because you taught us how to talk. You taught us how to sell ourselves with our words, not with anything else, but to stand there and to convince people that, you know what, I know what I'm talking about, and this is how I'm going to show you. That meant more to me than I think ever picking up a microphone and getting in a wrestler's face would. Or, I mean, I went to England. I did 1PW, and I've never had a more extreme moment than the entire audience sat down because one of the wrestlers was walking around with a glass bottle in his hand, and the 1PW staff had put it out there that nobody was to get in this guy's face because he would actually drag a girl by her hair. Like, he'd grabbed a photographer girl and dragged her around the ring by her hair. And so there was this kind of almost like surreal atmosphere of he will go for somebody. He won't break character. And I think the little Scottish person in me decided, well, feck this. I'm not going to cowtail to this guy who's a little bit shorter than me. Okay, he's a damn sight older than me, but he's human. So if he comes at me with a bottle, I know exactly what to do. I've been living in Glasgow. Fuck it. And I stood up and I stared him down, and there was a moment when they were recording it, and the guy that was the owner of the company almost had me in the shot. But because I wasn't contractually obligated to be on camera, he didn't include me. But you can see almost like the blinkers going on in the guy's head of, oh shit, she's not backing down.
Yeah.
I've got to think of something else I can do because this girl is outthinking me. She's outmaneuvering me. I've got to save my character. So he was bum rushed by our fake security to go to the back. And that was the moment I earned respect from all the male US wrestlers that was over. And that was the first time. It wasn't, the guy with the bottle was not Rhino, but it was the first time I met Rhino. And there was almost like a mutual moment of, this girl, it does know what she's here to sell something that we don't know anything about. We have no idea how it works, but she's kind of cool. So I'm gonna talk to her. I'm going to get to know her a little bit. And that was the turning moment for me, because I went from being just this author who'd been studying under Russo to being this girl who was like, okay,
in the thick of it.
I've got chops. I've got chops. I can hold my own. This is kind of cool. And that's what I respect about you, because there's almost a sense of respect from the pro wrestling world towards you as well. And I think as writers and as creative people, we don't really get accepted very often in wrestling. So when you find somebody else that's kind of accepted, you're like, oh, there's another rainbow. I'm going to gravitate to it, you know?
I mean, respect is hard enough to come along in any kind of field, but in pro wrestling, there's also that extra added element of, well, who did you beat? Or, well, what have you done in wrestling? And, you know, somebody like Omayan, like I said, like I didn't play any sports in school. I was not the slightest bit interested in it. I'm like, yeah, I've got asthma. I'm not going to run around doing that. I'll, you know.
No, I'll drop down dead. Yeah. Self-preservation.
But when you do something like I worked for a little indie fed in New Jersey called Old Time Wrestling, where I was brought on. A friend of mine was one of their wrestlers, and he was like, you know, they're interested in having somebody redo their website. You're interested? And I was like, yeah, sure, man, that'd be kind of fun. And the first meeting I had with former ECW referee Jim Molyneux and another person who had been running that, they were like, so are you interested in taking bumps and whatever? And I was like, no, not in the slightest. But you know, I got to work with them and did, you know, I helped out people like Nick Camarado, who's an AEW, tried to work on his character a little bit. Jimmy Lloyd is another person that I had worked with quite a bit, and Brian Johnson from Ring of Honor. You know, you very quickly have to do something to prove that you get it, and that you're not just somebody who's, I mean, it's great to be a fan, and it's great to be somebody who can tap into just that sort of, because even being a fan is in of itself, it's kind of a commitment that a lot of people don't understand. Because anytime I'm watching pro wrestling and somebody new is like, you know, we're having friends over or something, and they're just like, well, what's going on? Why is whatever? And you're like, you're going to need to take some time to get sucked into this world before you even understand how to look at it, let alone how to interpret it. But when you can work with people that are in wrestling and you can get complimented by something, one of the best compliments I ever had in my entire career was Mick Foley had reached out one time wanting me to check out his book and interview him and all. And the very first thing he said to me was, I've checked out your work and I love it. And I was like, oh, I love you, Mick Foley. Like,
so, you're like just a little kid moment of boom, you know,
Right. So it's like, it's really good to be able to get that sort of response of, okay, this guy might not have, what's his finisher or something along those lines. He might have not earned that respect in that way, but he can see through the writing side of it. And
Yeah.
I had a whole discussion with my wife the other day where, because she's an amazing artist. If anybody wants to check out creepy_Caroline on Instagram, she can paint, she can sculpt, she can draw, like she across the board. But I don't have any of that talent, as I said. And we were talking about the differences between creative minds. And I had a kind of revelation about a week or so ago where I said, what's interesting is the more I think about it, the thing that I can create is character depth. And whether it's Batman or it's, if anybody checks out the Spider-Man blueprint or my absolute Power Rangers one, if you take Power Rangers and you make it more adult and you do a 12 film storyline of that, that's in and of itself, it's an undertaking. But when it comes to character and stuff in pro wrestling, that's what I think has me hooked on it is I'm down to watch AEW and see people flip around and do amazing things and have 5-star matches and all. But I can't connect with it the way that I can with WWE in a lot of ways because it's the absurd, ridiculous soap opera type characters that Undertaker is my second favorite wrestler of all time. Shawn Michaels, of course, has to take number one. But
of course, yeah.
For people that are like, let me be very serious about Superman and dive into the differences of what makes that character so different, or let me take every Terminator film that has been terrible after Terminator 2, my favorite movie of all time, and make it, the best version of that and get really deep into that. And then you go, but you like pro wrestling? And you're like, yeah, because it's fascinating. And there's an unlimited amount of exploration that you could do with all the different characters, all the different environments that they have going on. It's way more complicated than the way that, I love South Park, but the way that South Park's parody of it, it does make it seem like it's just a bunch of people in underwear just yelling at each other.
Sometimes it is.
Sometimes it is. And sometimes you get somebody like Big Dick Johnson on WWE, and it quite literally is somebody in their underwear.
Yeah, it's underwear. Yeah. What I like, and I think this is where my respect for anybody that writes wrestling comes from, and knowing my small adventure into it, is you got to create not only something that's believable with depth in a maybe 4 to 8 minute segment, which also usually has to include beating the guy down. You have to create something that the crowd can get behind. You have to sell this to a commercial demographic. You don't just have one person you're selling it to. You've got maybe 5.5 million people at home, and you have the people in that arena that you've got to convince every second that this is something they should be investing emotion, energy, time, love, and passion into. And I think to write it, you have to be as passionate about it as the people that are performing it. And I think writers get sold short when it comes to wrestling. And I have been a WWE fan since I was 5 years old. To give you a context, so from 1995 I started watching it. And I started trading tapes with kids in a hospital ward or at school because luckily enough we had some American kids that lived in my hometown, and we traded for tapes, and I devoured everything I could find. But still to this day, and I give this honor everywhere I go, the two deepest characters that I truly ever understood. One was Raven, because that character had so many friggin' levels to him that I don't think I even know where the levels actually end. And I don't think anyone ever will with Raven, because Raven's got a lot more in that mind than anybody could ever predict. And I don't know if that's from his Mensa or just from the fact that he had such an entertaining life. So he, to me, was one of the most believable characters of all time. I do think WWE dropped the ball with him, and that was only because the writers had no idea how to work with him. If they had somebody like me who could sit and listen to him, understand the way his mind flows, you could have had a really decent run with him. And I think there's a lot of things that could have been done with him to make him, I would say you could take the presence he had in ECW and recreate that in WWE, even with the top talent that was there. Just nobody knew how to work with him. And I think that was a huge misstep for that era.
Yeah,
But
Vince was probably just not interested enough, and that's a
no,
shame. Missed opportunities.
I don't think Vince understood pop culture at that point. You know, he wasn't surrounding himself with people that were young enough to be able to bring that pop culture to life. And I think the closest I would say that has come from that is now Triple H, because he will sit and he sits with the younger wrestlers. He sits with the younger audience members. He listens to what they're reacting to. He looks and does his research. And I think having him as head of creative and him leading the way is going to be such a powerful change to wrestling, because not only does he understand kayfabe and the wrestling itself, but he understands the power of looking at pop culture and looking at what's popular and using that to push wrestling forward and keep it something that will be here 40, 50 years from now. With AEW, I am so delighted to see that AEW is here and it is another place for wrestlers to work and to hone their craft. The only thing I'll ever say about AEW is they need better writing staff, and I think they're starting to get writers in there that are going to make a huge difference. But I think what they need to learn is there needs to be writers that works with the boys and not just letting the boys run their characters all the time. They need guidance
Yeah.
of a writer that can show them story arcs, because wrestlers are incredible at creating characters. They just don't understand. There needs to be an arc to every story. And if you don't understand how to put together a three-structure arc in this short space of time that you've got to sell it to people, and also know how to sell it over a weekly period, then that's where you're going to hit problems. And I mean, the best examples I know of being able to do long-term storytelling without somebody literally holding their hand is Daniel Bryan. That guy can write a story and understand story arcs because he spent time with writers at WWE. He spent time studying it. He spent time understanding how to create those arcs. And he listened to people like Raven. He understood what Raven was saying. Raven is one of the best three arc structured wrestlers that I know, because he took the time when he was working backstage at WWE and he was around writers. He absorbed so much, and not just from the boys on the road, but he went and he listened to Russo, and Russo did teach him about three arc structure and how to set up stories, and I think in a way Vince had the power of the silver tongue, because he went from where he was to be one of the top writers in wrestling. And there was an element of him picking up what Eric was trying to do in creative and TNA too. Raven was always learning. Raven read books. How many wrestlers do you know that you can walk onto a plane with and see sitting reading an actual book? Not a comic book, but an actual full-blown novel. There's a reason he's Mensa, people. It's because he wanted to learn. He was smart. He understood that there was things that he didn't know, and he went and he found them out. And if we can get more Daniel Bryans that can teach the next generation about story arcs, storytelling, and I think he is starting to teach a lot of the veterans, look, it's fantastic you've got this character, but how do you make a story out of it? How do you make this last? How do you sell this to people? Then if they can get more people like that in AEW, then AEW will be something that will be around for a very long time. But if they don't get in the right people that can do the writing and keep the arcs running for a long period of time, I'm scared it's going to end up like TNA.
Yeah, I mean, you said something that really rings true when it comes to this, and that's about this sort of like, I mean, a dissertation could be written about it, but like there's a dance that plays out when people are in the ring, and, you know, two people that are wrestling each other, they have to work together. They have to work the crowd. They have to figure out their timing for everything. They have to tell psychological stories, and they have to tell, you know, if they're selling an injury. There's a lot that has been said about in-ring performers, but what hasn't had enough attention, in my mind at least, is the relationship between writer and wrestler, because there are plenty of people, you know, The Rock, Ric Flair, Steve Austin, that can go out there, they can cut a promo on the spot. And that in and of itself is just a God-given talent. And sometimes you have to learn it. Sometimes you have to just tweak it, whatever. But there are plenty of people that need that extra bump from a writer. And some of them are brilliant. Like Bray Wyatt is somebody who has a million ideas that he wanted to put out there. And unfortunately, we can't see that anymore after his passing. But he seemed like he was somebody that needed a writer to be able to reel those in and to shape those ideas in a way that you can present it going forward. And, you know, they've said before about Freddie Prinze Jr. coming in to help people with acting, or there's a great video that Max Landis put out there of Wrestling Isn't Wrestling, where he breaks down the psychology of the Triple H character over the past like 20 plus years. And if you get somebody that can understand how, you know, Undertaker and Kane can last as long as they did, compared to guy who is wrestler or girl who is wrestler who just goes out there, says, I'm going to beat so-and-so, and then they fight, then that's what makes it the difference between, I'm not going to toss out any names that I think are underwhelming, but a long list of people on any roster that, okay, they're a generic looking person, they do cool moves, but who cares? And then people who are like, you mentioned Bryan Danielson, who can transcend that and be somebody who fans can connect with, whether they're a casual fan or they are a hardcore fan that's been there for their entire. You've been a fan since you've been 5. I've been a fan since I at least was a fan before 5, because I know I was Hulk Hogan for Halloween when I was 5. So, you know,
fortunately, I was in Scotland. I would have been a fan of it because I had been born, but unfortunately, I was trapped in Scotland where we were slightly limited.
So it's an interesting thing that I wish that there would be more respect given to writers in pro wrestling. The same way that it is in comics, and the same way in film and everything. I mean, how many people crap on the Marvel Cinematic Universe these days because they don't think that it's actually art. And then you look at something and you go, Captain America Winter Soldier is a spy thriller. It's not just a comic book film. And Ant-Man is a heist comedy. And that's something that I've always tried to take, whether it's the wrestling side of it or it's the entertainment side of it, to any work that I do, if it's creative writing or if it's something, just purely writing articles or analysis or podcasts or anything, is that sort of respect to everything. And the fact that you can go deeper and you can take a story that a lot of people at their surface level would look at Cody Rhodes versus the Bloodline and they would go, okay, it's generic good guy against generic bad guy. And if you watch, it's David versus Goliath. It's Friends betrayal going back to the Shield days, which that in and of itself, you have to have a history and appreciation of factions in the past, like Evolution. And the more that you can get into these things and the more that you can get into any of those, I mean, the reason why I love Batman as much as I do is because it's not just a guy dressed up as a bat that's punching people. It's, there's the Arkham Sessions podcast is an amazing breakdown of the psychology behind them. And, it's the reason Spider-Man is as big of a character as he is because people identify with him, and nobody identifies with somebody who can swing through buildings. It's not something that we can all do, but yeah, we can try, but it's not going to come out the same way.
A lot.
I'd be lying if I'd said that I wasn't walking around in New York and every once in a while just kind of, put out my wrist and did a little thwip motion and just not today, but we all try to move things with the force or something. So
I get that when I'm sick and I'm like, because I don't want to
Yeah.
get up.
Just
But
one of these days, it's gonna work.
one of these days, exactly. One of the things that I said, I've been an author on and off now for, oh my gosh, since 2009. One of the things that I sat down when I had a friend who's a big name here in Scotland, and he did everything he could to get into WWE, and that was his only goal. So his only drive was to get to WWE, and his friends all got signed, and the more his friends got signed, the more he suffered with getting left behind. And I understood that because I'd lost a lot of friends over the years, and it was very affecting for me. So one day I sat down and I said, well, how do I leave something positive for wrestling, since it gave me so much? It gave me the ability to believe in myself. It taught me that even though I'm the smallest person in the room, I can still have one of the biggest pulls, one of the biggest influences. And so I started Marie's World with the concept of, let's show the billion-dollar romance industry the wrestling's got a place in their sports genre. Not just as autobiographies, not just as books that Mick Foley puts out for kids, but actually put something together that shows that this can be a transcending form of entertainment. And I've written screenplays with the exact same purpose. And I think the biggest honor I had was I had a conversation with Shane Helms one night, and he said, "This is probably one of the freshest ideas I've ever heard." The idea of twin daughters of a guy who screws over a wrestling company, is forced to retire and go into hiding, never tells his kids he was a wrestler. They're suddenly in the middle of it. They're suddenly in a world they have no concept about, no real clue about. One of them ends up marrying the owner of the wrestling company, and the other one decides to take her sister's journals, her dad's journals, and publish them to the world, which is the ultimate betrayal. If you could imagine your brother taking your private writing and then just sending it out there, sticking it out there for the entire world to read. And that was this series that me and Joe created from two different worlds. I was a dancer who lived a world where it was very cutthroat and we pushed our bodies to breaking, and he came from the world of pro wrestling, which was drama. It was predetermined. It was and for us to come together and create what we did is by far, I think, the freshest idea that we've ever had. And that was to show that a wrestler who's done this for 30, at that time he'd done it for 35 years, and a girl from Scotland who nobody knew could come together and write something that was completely fresh, completely different. And every single person that's read it has been left with something from it. They have all taken something different from it. That was our goal, and that's what we achieved. And that is by far, I think, the biggest nod that me and Joe could have given to pro wrestling.
And you never know if that's going to be the thing that somebody comes across, that because of whether it's the romance side of it, or whether it's, if it's a screenplay, or if it's a novel, or if it's a podcast, or if it's whatever. The different mediums can attract different people, and then people get sucked into things, and the amount of draw that, it's not just pro wrestling, but pro wrestling, of course, like if we're talking about that at this moment, like you can take somebody and you can bring them in with a little bit of a hook, and not quite, hook from AEW, but then you can draw them in a way that they can start funneling in the other aspects of pro wrestling. And before you know it, you've created a pro wrestling fan just by whatever that was that initial draw. So if they got into it because they were into a story that happened to be a little bit about pro wrestling, but they were interested in the other story about it. One of the articles that I wrote up recently about for Collider was the difference between for anybody who's unaware, there's a new show that's going to be workshopped through FX about pro wrestling. It's supposed to be a half-hour sitcom about the LA independent circuit. And my immediate reaction to hearing that news, outside of very cool, I'm interested to see it, was how do they learn from Heels and Young Rock and Glow and not run into the same pitfalls and make the same mistakes? Because I know people who love the show Glow, but they don't like pro wrestling, and they won't watch Monday Night Raw. And I know that I have a friend that was always into pro wrestling and dipped in and out. Most pro wrestling fans seem to dip in and out, it seems, at some point. And he got back into it because of Heels. And the reason he got into it from Heels was because Stephen Amell was Green Arrow, and he was always into comics. So by proxy of watching a Green Arrow show, he got back into pro wrestling. And there are people that watched Young Rock because they just wanted to laugh at a story about a funny family. And I don't know a single person that has ever sat down and watched pro wrestling with me. If it was a worst show that ever existed, even still, that didn't at some point get hooked on something and start asking me questions and start getting into why is this Otis guy doing what he's doing? Or you mean to tell me that person's supposed to be able to summon lightning or whatever? And this is ridiculous, but they keep watching.
Exactly. And I mean, that's what I saw when I did that worldwide release of Marie's World. I know of at least 20 women that would never have, in a million years, would have turned on a WWE show. They read my book, and I got 20 messages from each of them telling me that they now watched every single week. And then when I did a podcast about AEW, and I was giving AEW a little bit of props in the middle of a conversation with somebody else, they then transferred their love because they understood what I was presenting in the books, and they went into AEW. Now, since then, they have come back to me and said, "Oh my gosh, don't understand what's happened to AEW. The storylines aren't as good." But they are still fans. They are women who are sort of their late 30s to 50s, who not a day in their life would ever have turned it on. But the concept that wrestlers were actually completely different when the cameras were off, that they actually were teddy bears, that they actually have a different side to them, was enough to draw in at least 20 women. With the right push, if that series really did get a push into romance, I think you could see the female demographic triple or, even double at the very least. Because women don't see wrestling as a non-gendered show. They see it as a male-dominated show that doesn't offer them anything. And by having females wrestle, that is not enough to get a woman who's never watched a day of wrestling in her life to turn it on. Not even the sexiest guy in as much baby oil as you could possibly pour on him is going to make her turn it on. Because you have to offer more than just one kind of storyline. There needs to be, if you want the female demographic, and I can tell you, if you get a really strong female demographic, they are very loyal, they are very ravenous, and they will devour anything you put out. But you gotta get them first. And until they have, I mean, they had a small female demographic start to shift to them when they had John Cena and Nikki doing their very public relationship and very public engagement. But where they lost them was there was nothing being offered after that that kept bringing in a female demographic. It became very male, very physical, very more towards what wrestling used to be. And that turned away their female demographic. And if anybody's listening from WWE, which I very much doubt they will, but if they do, go back and look at the demographics. You almost had that change in demographics with females with your AJ Lee storyline. But because you didn't run it long enough and because the arc wasn't better set up, you lost what could have been a very strong pull into $1 billion role into $1 billion industry that you currently don't touch.
Yeah,
That
they're
is
able to tap into so many things, and it's
mhm,
if it's the Hurricane and he's tapping into the comic book side of it,
yeah,
or Total Divas bringing in a friend of mine, his wife has no interest in pro wrestling, and we had conversations when Total Divas was on, which he was like, I absolutely love that show, but I don't watch the actual wrestling. And
mhm,
there are people that are into it because they're into sports. I'm somebody
yeah,
who, I don't like any sports at all. If I'm watching, typical like Monday Night Football or something like that, it's
yeah,
extremely rare, and I'm bored out of my skull eventually. But
yeah,
there's a sporting element of it that can draw people in. There's people that are into it for the soap opera stuff. There's people that are into it because they just like to see people do car crash things and smash each other with light tubes and steel
oh
chairs and
gosh,
all.
yes, yeah,
If you bring something to everything and everything to something, then
yeah,
you can't really fail, because you're going to get people that are going to, from one segment to another, as long as they watch long enough that they can get that little thing that gets hooked into them,
yeah,
then you're good. And there are so many people that don't quite understand that or appreciate it, because they do look at pro wrestling and they do think of it as just
a male
grunting
dominated show.
and,
Yeah,
a series of moves. And granted, there are companies out there that do that, and there are pro wrestlers that can't do anything other than, here's my really solid body slam, but if you get me into character work, I can't do anything or whatever. But
yeah,
the thing that I always come back to with wrestling is, it is ridiculous. It is
mhm,
stupid. It is absurd and silly, and that's okay.
yeah,
It's not supposed to be something that is Oscar caliber
no,
storytelling in the same way that Oscar bait movies are.
mhm,
Just exactly the same as you can watch my favorite comedy of all time is Robin Hood Men in Tights.
yeah,
And it is a brilliant movie that is absolutely just, I've watched that for my entire life, and I still pick up on jokes that I never understood before. And something with wrestling that I think gets lost in translation is the ability to appreciate that something is different,
mhm.
but still equally great in its own way.
Yeah, and I think it does do that, and I think it offers that to a fantastic range of people. I think what I was hitting on was there's been a lot of talk, particularly on 83 Weeks and other podcasts about the drop in female audiences. And it was irking me in a way because, you know, some of us has been watching wrestling for decades. And the fact that they can't work out why they can't hold a female audience, it flabbergasts me, I think, more than anything. Um,
Like you
and
said, I
hope,
mean, you can put out somebody like a
yeah,
Randy Orton, great looking guy, covered in baby oil, whatever. And I know people that are
huge
fans of pro
fans
wrestling
because of it.
because of
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
And just the same as there are men that are, whoever it might be, that are like, okay, you put out a Tiffany Stratton or
a
whoever,
Charlotte
and then
Flair. Yep.
that's, yeah,
Hmm.
and then they get hooked because of just somebody's looks. But then you need to get them to actually become a fan beyond that, because you could
Yeah,
just very easily just look up, you can Google anything and you can see pictures of that online.
yeah.
So
I mean, you could look up porn and get the same sort of
right, yeah,
response.
there's a certain hub that people can click on very easily, and if
Yeah,
they
exactly. And I think that was kind of where, I mean, I've watched it and I listen to people and I think because I do listen and I spend a lot of time listening to different people. I just think if we're going to see wrestling continue to push through what is possibly the most chaotic and dangerous time for entertainment, then there needs to be a slight shift. Triple H is getting there, and he's
Hmm.
doing that, and
He
but if
gets it.
yeah, he gets it. But if you want the Tony Khans and the TNAs and the AEWs to keep surviving, they need to find that thing that makes them stand out against WWE, that makes them different, but hooks in a demographic that's sustainable for them. And whether it's they take on the concept of heels and they run a very more drama based sort of setup, or if they take on something, they have to do something that's different from WWE. They can't just say this is where the best wrestle. It's got to be more than that now, because entertainment's changed. You know, with reality TV and football and all these other things out there, they're they're competing now more than ever for audiences. So how do you make
Yeah, and they
somebody?
compete with everything too.
Yeah,
It's sports entertainment. They have to compete with sports and entertainment.
exactly. And the thing is, if you don't have something that's a little bit better than what's on another show, how many times is people going to just say, "Oh, EW is a bit boring this week. I'm just going to go over and watch some football."
Hmm.
That's the thing. Like wrestling never stops. It doesn't have seasons. It doesn't have breaks. But if they want to keep the audiences from one season to the next, they need to be thinking about investing in people to help them do that. But picking writers that know the industry and know how to work with wrestlers. And we are a very small pool of people, you included, that can do that. Because if you and I were in the writer's room and we got, okay, Anthony, you're working with these three people this week. You've got to come up with storylines for the next month for these three, and I've got three. You're guaranteed I'm going to go and find them in catering and sit down and go over, well, these are what we need to do, or these are the ideas. Let's work together, create something that is magical compared to what writers have been doing lately, which is sticking in a writer's room, kind of like TV, and they're trying to write stories for characters that they don't understand or they don't know or they don't get the opportunity to sit down and have conversations with them. I mean, if I was a perfect example, if I had a Raven, he's gonna have a new love interest, and I've got to write a storyline. You're damn tootin'. I'm fucking blowing his phone up saying, hey, let's go get lunch. And I'm sitting there and I'm planning something with him because I can write, but he's the person that's created the character. There has to be a synchronized relationship between the both
Same
of
as
them.
there is with directors, writers, and actors.
Exactly.
That's a it's a family that brings that together. It's not just one person. And there are people in pro wrestling that they can craft their own storylines. And I would
Yeah.
trust Kevin Owens, for instance, to start and finish creating a whole storyline for himself. But
And you
then
just give
there
them
are
the
plenty of
bullet points of
people.
where you're going. Yep.
Yeah, you just, okay, well, we have to promote this today, so make sure you hit on this and whatever. But
Yep.
then there are other people that they need to be pushed in that direction, and they need somebody that can crack open that coconut and get them the delicious fruit that's on the inside. I guess I'm
They,
hungry right now. I don't know.
yeah, no, it's
It's
a
an
good
analogy.
analogy. But I mean, yeah, for me, it was, I always thought on it like when I did 1PW, to me it was like, okay, these are the people I get to talk to a character. How often can a writer say that they can sit there and have a conversation with with the character that they've got to write? You
Hmm.
can't. It's impossible because it doesn't happen. The only place that can actually happen in it is pro wrestling.
Right.
And that's, I
Yeah,
mean,
as much as any other medium is still the same, a lot of the same tricks and
yeah.
all, you don't talk to Hannibal Lecter. You
No, you
talk
can't sit,
to Anthony
yeah,
Hopkins.
you can't sit down and be like, "Hey, you know, let's think of a character we can pull. Hey, Batman, do you like pink or blue better?"
Right.
You know, you can't have those kinds of conversations, but you can take a wrestler aside and say, "Hey, I've got this really cool idea, but I don't know how your character would respond in this situation. Help me craft this so that it's something amazing." And I think,
and it brings in that genuine element, because there's a difference between Drew McIntyre being scripted 10 years ago versus the Drew McIntyre that goes out there now.
yeah. And I think Drew has a big say in what he does. I think he learned the trick that a lot of pro wrestlers don't get taught, and that is find your writer and have conversations with them, work with them, fucking bust your ass to make friends with them if need be, to get the best out of your time on television. That's the, I mean, if nothing else, if a newbie wrestler has listened to this show just for shits and giggles, and that's what they can walk away with from our conversation today, learn to respect your writer and love them, that's good enough for me. Because let's be honest,
It's the
we're all big
same.
fans.
It's the same relationship as there are for any other thing. If you are doing stunt work, you have to be able to trust your stunt coordinator. And if you are working with, it doesn't have to be like an action based thing or something. If you're playing the Queen of England in something, you need to be able to have wardrobe that, and makeup and costume design and all that can illustrate that to you. And at the end of the day, the editor has to have a say in it, and the composer needs to put a score behind it that can convey the emotion that the actor is putting out there. It's a trust that is simplified in a way from a fan's perspective that they don't quite get that magnifying glass and put that under. And people that are tapped into it, like you and I would be, we can see how the sausage is made. That's the phrase.
We know how the sausage is made, and then we kind of sit there, and when people are like, "Oh my God, who's gonna win the match?" and you and I are like 2 minutes in, and we're like, "Yep, we know who's gonna win this," or because we can see the tells. If you watch it long enough and you study it long enough, and you listen to people long enough, you can start to tell. Like
the amount of times I'll be like washing a dish in the other room, or in the middle of doing something else, and the WWE's on in the background or whatever, and I'm like, I got a feeling that the match is going to end in about 30 seconds, and then it just happens, and it's like I'm not watching the screen at all, but just there's something about the atmosphere that you can tell.
You can tell. And I mean, it's the same. I drive my friend nuts. I go over once a month. I stay at her house, and she goes, "You got to tell me who's going to win all the matches," and I'm like, "No." Because what would be the fun in that?
I don't want to spoil it.
Yeah, you don't want to spoil it. And I think one of the things that, and I will shock a lot of people in this, is that one of the things that I found out by watching and studying and then actually asking some of the boys was that their shoot interviews is a complete work. The shoot interviews are just them being their characters, adding to their storylines, adding to the characters themselves. Not 100% truth. And for so many people who watch those shoot interviews think that they are being 100% honest and 100% letting their guards down. And it took me 2 years watching I don't know how many shoot interviews before I realized this is a work. They are selling possible storylines. They are selling possible feuds. They are selling their characters in a certain way, in a certain light. That means that the camera for them is never off. And I think the difference between, to get to know a wrestler, you need to have the ability to call them by their real name. They need to be able to give you the permission to say, hey, call me by my real name, not my wrestling name. And that's when the line between character and wrestler is crossed. That is when you get to know the person behind it. Because a lot of them are drilled into being protective of their characters, because their characters are their income, it's their livelihoods. And I think that's also something that people don't notice. They think they're having conversations with the wrestlers themselves, but actually they're just being made as part of the show, because they don't know how to turn it off unless they're in a safe situation or in a safe room that allows them to do that.
It's kind of the same equivalent of, if you are going to talk to Chris Jericho, you're talking to Chris Jericho. You're not talking to Chris Irvine.
No, you're not.
the same way that it might seem like people that go on a late night show are being themselves because they're not being a character. There's just an onion that you're peeling one layer to. And Tom Cruise is Tom Cruise. He's not Thomas Mapother. So
Exactly.
you peel one layer of that onion, you still have a couple more to go before you get to the real true person underneath that. And the moments where you do get to see that, you know, like I said, like I worked with some people for like OTW and all. You get to see the light switch on and off.
Yeah. And that I've seen it. I've gone from the moments of seeing the character and the man behind the character, for instance. I realized I like the man behind the character a lot more than I like the character. But that, that's a thing that I can reveal because I've spent so much time writing it and listening and studying. And I think, you know, I wanted to offer something different today. And I knew from your experiences that you would be able to sort of flow with this conversation with me and you would understand where I was going with it, because there's almost like you and I have a respect for what they do because we know that they lay their bodies on the line and we know the dangers and the risks they put themselves through. But at the same time, we also respect them because they are very gifted performers to do what they do at the level that they do it at. And just to swerve the story a little bit or swerve the conversation a little bit, tell us a little bit about what you're reading right now that's getting you excited about the industry. We're doing a massive swerve here. Why not?
I don't know how many people you've had on your podcast that would have this answer, but I am a writer that writes pretty much 24/7 and absolutely hates reading. I do not.
I have moments like that too. I legit have to force myself to read. So yes, I understand that.
Yeah, I have discussions all the time with people that are like, what book are you reading or whatever, and I'm like, none. I haven't read just a pure novel or anything in probably close to 10 years because to me I'm in that space where I want to watch a movie instead. I want to watch a TV show, or I want to listen to a podcast or an audio drama or something, or even just read an article that can trigger that for me in a different way, because my style, if I were to be able to publish any of the stuff that I had written and all, I'm very much more on like that screenwriter side of it. I'd rather be told interior bank and just imagine the bank rather than be told it's a Sunday afternoon and it was really bright outside and whatever, because at that point I've already created a whole world by just you telling me bank. And
it's
that
two different beats, readers need the guidance, whereas anybody in entertainment, we just need that handful of words, that handful of,
give me a crumb.
We get crumbs and we're like, oh yeah, we've got it, we get excited about it. I think that's also something that I teach on this podcast, is that people who love to read scripts are different to people who love to read books. And there's
it's a very different medium.
Yeah, and it's a very finite group of people that can both read scripts and read novels and then take novels and turn them into scripts. That is like a very, very, very small pool of people.
And then people who do the opposite too. People who are taking movies or whatever and doing novelizations. It's an art form that, not many people would really realize a writer in general.
Yeah.
How many people do you get that come across oh, you're a writer, you could probably write almost anything. And you're like, okay, well, I can't be a technical writer. I'm not a copywriter. I'm not a, whatever.
Exactly. There's
different forms of writing.
Limit. Yeah. And like, it's always funny to me because I write novels and I write screenplays. And then my family has two famous poets in it. And they just expect me to be able to write poetry as good as what I could a novel. And I'm like, poetry is an entirely different beast. It is not the same. You can't just jump from writing a very detailed novel with probably one of the most complex worlds in it to then writing 15 lines that's supposed to spin your head in 50 directions, you know? Like,
Yeah, poetry
it's
and
not how
prose
it
is
comes.
different the same way as asking a musician to paint.
Yeah. Yeah,
They're both
exactly.
art, but they're completely different forms.
Yeah, and that's another thing that like we've been discussing kind of on the podcast in many different ways is explaining the different styles. Like there's people that can only write romance. They don't know how to write a thriller. They don't know how to diverse into a different genre because their passion and where they're comfortable is in romance. So that's why I have as many different people from many different walks of life on here because there's so many newbie writers who are trying to find, well, what is it that makes me me, that their podcast is the podcast is a good way of finding out, well, what direction can I go in.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's got their own, Stephen King's a horror writer,
Yeah.
and he might be able to write something like a slapstick comedy for all we know, but you're going to trust that that's probably where his wheelhouse is because that's where he landed. And
Yeah.
I know that I would have a much easier time crafting a storyline about something, from the comic book type of realm or the pro wrestling type of realm or, the
Yeah.
things that I'm passionate about on that front than if somebody were to say, okay, well, we want you to be responsible for something like a Hallmark film. I'd be like, all right, well, let me take a couple minutes to take a deep breath. I'll try to figure it out, but I'll have to get in a different headspace before I start writing about the
Yeah,
blueberry
it's a
farm
different
and
world.
something.
Yeah, it's a completely different world. Like for me, because of my compartmentalization and the fact I'm very good at it, is I can be writing two books at once. So I can be going from the world of romance and then jumping into the world of high fantasy and adventure easily because my brain compartmentalizes. It can say, okay, we're working with this set of characters. I'll just hit play on this, and or
Mm-hmm.
we're going into the romance world. Let's switch our brains and go there. And that's the thing, like there is people that can do that, but there's, we're not a huge group of people, and you should not every publisher should be able to say, hey, give me 50 different genres a year, because it's just not possible for every writer. Publishers need to know the writers that they're working with, same as the directors. They need to know what they're getting into with the writers that they're hiring to write their ideas or their concepts or what they want to film.
Yeah, for every Robin Williams who can do comedy and then people don't think that they can do drama, and then you see a drama that's out there and you're like, oh, Robin Williams is actually a good actor. And then there are certain people that they play one character and that's it. And
Yeah.
there are writers that can be amazing at one thing and only one thing. There are those that can bounce back and forth, or again, like, not to put myself up on a pedestal, but if you ask me to write up an article that's analyzing something, or a review of something, and then an editorial, and then something that's more creative writing, and then something that's more, a podcast. Even the podcast is a big difference between writing, because you're writing with your mouth instead of with your fingers and all. And being able to do the back and forth and all that is definitely one of the things that I have always enjoyed. I'd rather be working on a bunch of projects at the same time and then just see wherever my flow goes than to be so rigid and to just only doing one thing. And it drives me nuts if all I've done for the entire week is just write up results about pro wrestling, or just write up analysis about TV shows or movies or whatever. Then I start getting that itch of, okay, well, now I gotta work a little bit on something like, my blueprints stuff, or, if
Go
you
do a
get
podcast.
into, do a podcast about nothing but your favorite foods. It's, you gotta
You gotta
tweak your
switch it up.
creative. Yeah.
And then that's another thing that I was saying. That's about balance in life. you've got to find balancing, and you've got to find ways so you don't burn out. And I think a lot of writers, I get a lot of messages where they say, "Oh, I'm burnt out," and I constantly say you've got to find that happy medium. Like, I know for 2 days a week, 2 days, minimum 2 days a week, which is Thursday and Friday, I will be saying bye bye to the writer side of myself at 1 o'clock in the morning, my time, because I'm going in to be a gamer. I'm going in to be a competitive League of Legends gamer for 2 to 3 hours. And work can't get in that part of my mind for 2 to 3 hours, because that is like one of the things I've learned is having things that I know every week that I can switch off all the other stuff and just relax and focus and learn something new and do something different and have conversations with other people. And that helps me not burn out. It helps me to keep writing. It helps me to keep talking to editors. It helps me find publishers that don't drive me insane. It's a freedom that I've had to learn. Nobody told me this when I started in 2009, but it's something I had to learn on my writer's journey in order to then stop burnout. How do you do it? How do you prevent burnout for yourself?
I'd love to say I have an answer, but at the same time, the amount of times I've said I've burned out to friends of mine recently in particular is, you know, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't burned out. But it is just kind of it's a buffet for me. And, you know, my favorite food is pasta. If somebody were to say to me, like, you know, what do you want for dinner? I'm probably going to go with pasta in some fashion. But at the same time, you just, once in a while, you're like, I want a burger. And sometimes you want a piece of steak or something instead of that.
Switch it up. Yeah.
So when it comes to the writing side of it and, you know, the creative aspects of, it's been a while since I've acted, but doing acting instead of writing is another thing that the Batman Blueprint stuff I put up on there, totally different from doing an audio commentary track of watching a film. And that is very different from reviewing a movie because you got the live reaction to it and all. So it's a matter of changing up these little gimmicks and approaching something through a different perspective, which I think is kind of one of the strengths that I always put out there for, you know, if I'm joining a new website or something. It's if you have columns on a website and they just review pro wrestling and all they do is they just go, these are my 5 favorite things that happen on Monday Night Raw, or these are the people that I think should win at the next pay-per-view or whatever. That in of itself is good. And you can get people that they do that and it's perfectly fine. And they could do that over and over again and not get burned out. But maybe instead of doing a prediction thing where you run down this match and then who do you think is going to win this match and who do you think is going to win, maybe you do something else slightly different. And if people check out my Smart Out Moment podcast and YouTube channel and website, they'll see that you could have a discussion about the best pro wrestlers of all time, or you can do a Mount Rushmore, or you can do a mock draft. And with the mock draft, you have to then have a set amount of people that you're working with and go, okay, well, now I need to create my own card. And then you start getting into the discussion of the more that you do those things, the more that you realize, well, okay, I can work with these characters a little bit more. And if you are burned out with one stage of your creativity and one facet of your writing or whatever, switch it up and do something, either a different genre or you do a different type of thing. The better thing that you can do for keeping your creative motion going is to just switch to another lane. So I always, if I find myself in a spot where I'm just burned out because I've just been doing pro wrestling, I'll find myself in the middle of the night, which, I mean, the middle of the night, as if I sleep, at 6 o'clock in the, 6 o'clock in the morning, I'll be covering pro wrestling for 12 hours. And the next thing I know, I'll be trying to fall asleep and I'll just be like, all right, the difference between Mary Jane and Gwen Stacy is, and I'll start having notes about my Spider-Man thing or something. And that's, if I could do, if anybody asks me like, what would your dream job be? I'd be like, all right, well, it would have to be a combination of things because I can't imagine that I would just be working one gig forever. I'd have to be tapped into multiple different platforms.
Exactly. And I think that's what I had to learn the hard way was okay, burnout is a thing. And I had a period of time where I just couldn't write. I couldn't do anything. I was legit hitting a complete and utter brick wall, and I couldn't figure out for the life of me what I was doing wrong. Why was I getting stuck? And then it clicked in my head. It was like I can't keep just doing one thing over and over and over again. I need to find ways to break it up. I need to find hobbies. I need to find things that allows me to step away from what I've been doing. And I did. Um, and that's what keeps me going almost every day. It just keeps me going because it's a reminder that I can do this. I can be a writer, but I can also be Crystal at the same time. It's not a set routine. It's not rigid.
You
Well,
can get
thank
into your dance stuff. You can get into,
yeah,
you said it's a different between writing screenplays and novels. And
yeah. I mean, and that's the thing. When I stepped away and I retired from dance, I had to find a new thing, and I found writing. And then from writing, I found that I could work with wrestlers, and I worked with them, and I gradually evolved. And I think that's the thing with writers and creative people in general is you have to find ways to constantly evolve. You have to find ways to constantly change and grow. Otherwise, you get stagnant, and when you get stagnant, that's when the burnout really does kick in.
mm,
But thank you for so much for coming on the Book and Life podcast. It's been a true honor and pleasure to have you on, and we will hopefully have you back on within maybe sometime next year, and we can talk more. And maybe there'll be some exciting things we can talk about in regards to what you're working on and where you're going, and how we maybe even might have a more detailed conversation on the status of pro wrestling if that ends up being a thing. Um, but yeah, thank you so much for coming on. Guys, you want to check out next week as we have managed to secure ECW Press, who will be sending us an infinite amount of arcs, and we've got authors from all of there who will be willing to have conversations with us and will be willing to be sharing their journeys with all of us. So, without further ado, stay safe, everybody, and we'll see you all again next week.